Good morning. This is our 7th and next to last lecture for this season. I'd like to remind you that on the table in the hall downstairs is a sheet of paper on which you may write the names of those who would like to be new subscribers to the Hamilton Hall Lecture Series. Our topic today, Y2K, is one that has been the focus of much discussion and some concern. And we are very fortunate to have with us Peter Salem, the editorial director of Matrix Information and Directory Services. Dr. Salem earned a BS in chemistry from University College, New York University, a master's in Germanic languages, and a PhD in linguistics, both from New York University. In 1962-63, he was awarded a Fulbright Hays grant to Iceland. He received the NYU Founders Day Award for Distinguished Doctorate in 1964. In the early years of his career, he was a professor of linguistics in several universities. Now, he is an internationally recognized expert in computer languages. Dr. Salem was the executive director of the Usenix Association from 1986 to 1989. And from 1990 to 1992, he was executive director of the Sun User Group. He was the managing editor of Computing Systems, MIT Press, from 1988 to 1996. He is the author of several books, including A Quarter Century of Unix, 1994, and Casting the Net, From ARPANET to Internet and Beyond, 1995. He continues to write on a variety of computer-related topics for several magazines. It's my pleasure to present Dr. Peter Salem, who will speak on Y2K, Countdown to Disaster.
Does this work?
Yes.
Am I audible? Yes. The trick is, of course, to say, if you can't hear me, raise your hand. However, I'm very pleased to be here, and I want to thank the committee for inviting me. And let me start out by saying that there are many people who want to cast all sorts of fear and gloom into the universe. If you worry that planes will fall out of the sky at the stroke of midnight at the end of this year, the answer is no. There may be a large number of small glitches, and I will come to that. However, what I would like to first do is explain just what we mean by the Y2K problem. I don't say the Y2K bug because bugs are errors in computer programs. This is not an error. This is something that has come about through the effortless inexorability of the calendar. On the absolute most horrific level, one could say that unless they're fixed, all computer programs everywhere in the world may go on strike on January 1, 2000. And I'd ask you to imagine for a moment what chaos this would cause, pardon me. There wouldn't be any air traffic. There would be no traffic lights. There would be no lights in your home or in your company. Your VCR wouldn't even be able to blink the time at you. Goods wouldn't be delivered to stores. Their suppliers wouldn't be able to manufacture those goods. And perhaps best stores wouldn't be able to send you their bills. But at the same time, you couldn't send your invoices to anyone else. Business would effectively come to a halt. But the clear query is, could such a catastrophe happen? Well, to be quite honest, I'd like to encourage all of you to decrease the likelihood of the event. But you could, all of you, again, become part of the problem. Well, could computers really go on strike? That's an easy question. It's so simple that many people have a great deal of difficulty in believing that the problem is real. After December 31st, 1999, most computers in the world won't know what year it is. This is for a very simple reason. It sounds crazy. It sounds like a science fiction story. But computers have been programmed, by and large, to store the data in day, month, year format. That is to say, today would be 180399. Pretty straightforward. So what happens? We will get to Jan 1, 2000, and the information will be stored as 010100. That's interesting. We've told the computer to assume that, for example, 070469 means the 7th of April, 1969, and that 171203 means December the 17th, 1903. What will it assume that 010100 means? It will assume that 010100, and I'm sorry I keep repeating that, it means 01011900, or January 1st, 1900. And that's the problem, in the briefest way I can put it. Computers may think that all of the dates that are after December 31st, 1999 are actually 100 years ago. Or they may think that there's no date at all that's a 00. So what? Well, let's take a look at what I would call the most basic calculation that you can possibly do on a computer. Calculation that determines how much time has passed from one event to the next. For example, how old are you? I was born on May 13th, 1938. I know you all have, don't say it. If I ask the computer how old I am, it subtracts my birth date from the current date. So it will perform a calculation similar to 99 minus 38 and tell me that I'm 61 years old. That's fine. It's sad, but it's true. But on Jan 1, 2000, the calculation will be exactly the same. And when I subtract my birth year from the current year, I will find out that 00 minus 38 tells me that I'm minus 38 years old, which is silly and wrong and will cause havoc with every sort of interest calculation, the dating on various of the things on your grocery store shelves, etc. And in case you think that I'm joking, there have been 2 instances where human intervention stopped before it went all the way, but where a supermarket supplier, that is to say the headquarters where the warehouses are, were junking and garbaging food because it was almost 90 years beyond its expiry date. I mean, this is a realistic problem that we've already encountered. But it'll affect more than just interest calculations. It'll affect all the information that's based on time. When does your driver's license expire? When will your credit cards expire? When will this drug be no longer safe for use? When should a machine undergo regular maintenance? I was in Illinois last week, and I was picked up on one occasion by someone who had what really was a brand new Jeep. And I noticed that it had lovely digital readouts and a picture of the car. If you had your doors open, it showed one door open and this sort of thing. And the other thing it had was a readout that said something on the order of 6,600 miles, parenthesis, or something or other days till your next servicing. Now that's very nice, but that means there must be a calendar somewhere inside the chips in the car. And I'm willing to bet anything that none of those little chips that we all have all over our homes as well as in our cars has been tested or anything for Y2K compliance. That is to say, will they think the world has come to an end when it registers 00, or will it say, oh, it's 2000, that's what comes after 1999. Incidentally, I should point out that this is not at all a computer problem. It's one that's been embedded for at least 500 years in accounting systems. That is to say, even the manual ones, even the ones that ran on goose quill and parchment. Certainly as early as the first book I know of on bookkeeping, Luca's published in Venice in 1494. It's already that people are using the dates that we would probably write now as, let us say, 18 March apostrophe 99. So that if this was a time saver or an effort saver for people as early as the end of the 15th century, it's nothing compared. It's just that we have magnified the problems because we have become so reliant on the computer chip. And I say the chip intentionally because most of us think of the computer as this combination of a typewriter and a TV set that sits in front of people on a table, whereas 30 years ago we thought of them as things that took up rooms this size with ghastly numbers of electronic tubes and attended by high priests who wore lab coats. So this isn't an old problem. It's just that you have to realize computers are incredibly stupid. They are very, very good at manipulating symbols. But despite the fact that we talk about them sometimes as thinking machines, and despite the fact that we personify them in various ways, they haven't got anywhere near the adaptability of a subnormal human being, much less an intelligent human being. They do count effectively. They count their fingers extremely well and extremely rapidly. But outside of that, where any one of you encountering a parent or a grandparent whose birthday is in 71 or something like that, does not necessarily think that that person must be 28 years old, but could well be 128 years old. My paternal grandfather, who lived way too long, so to speak, he was not happy towards the end of his years, but well into his 90s, both mourned the fact that all of his friends had predeceased him, but also the fact that it was impossible for him to explain to people anymore that no, he had not gotten his date of birth wrong. He was not a moron, because even human beings are unwilling, once you've passed 90 or 95, to recognize that people do live to that length of time. The machine wouldn't comprehend it at all, and would have insisted, were he alive today, that he was 1971 taken away from 1999 or 28 years old, and probably deprived him of his pension. And the thing is that that is something that we all have to consider. And let me assure you right now, of all the government agencies I have looked at, and it's a number of them, the Social Security Administration is absolutely the best one where taking precautions and actually figuring out things. And in fact, Health and Human Services in general is, I think there may be a few payment glitches where Medicare, Medicaid is concerned, but they will be a matter of days, not a matter of not getting money and this sort of thing. But it's quite extraordinary. They saw this earliest, and they've done it best. The frightening part is that one of the worst agencies is the Department of Defense, who seems to still be thinking that, not realizing that there are something over 200 computer chips in every one of those super tanks. Well, there are probably 100. If you have a fancy, relatively new car, there are probably over 100 chips in them. But the odds are that private industry has thought about this because they make money from it, rather earlier than the Department of Defense has, because they take money away from us instead. Anyway, let me pursue this. Incidentally, if one of you needs clarification, please just effectively interrupt me. I mean, I can see all of your shining faces, and it seems to me that it may be worthwhile. If you have a query, the odds are that there are 6 other people who have the same query but don't want to raise their hands and draw attention to themselves. So be obstreperous. It's never worked when I told my daughters that. But let me go on. Why do we use only 2 digits? It's really not a thing that came about as a result of everyone looking at accounting books. It was the fact that we did it deliberately. That's the bad news. But with good intentions. That may be the good news. We all know the way the road to hell is paved, so I won't go into that. Even before computers entered the business world in the 60s and the early 70s, they were very, very expensive. And the expense was tied directly to 2 things. How much data a computer could store and how fast that data could be processed. Even tiny, seemingly incremental increases in either one of those resulted in enormous cost increases. Well, in ancient times, data was stored on hollerith cards, that big, what you might think of as IBM cards. They were 80 columns long, to be exact, and punching holes in a hollerith card by a certain kind of pattern and reading them first with a little wire finger and then later with a beam of light gave information. Each of the cards could only give you 80 characters because it had 80 columns of information. 80 characters isn't a lot of information. Write down your full name, address, birth date, bank balance, bank account number, that sort of thing. You've gone way beyond 80 characters, which means you'd have trouble storing it all on a single card. From actual experience, I'm convinced that the fundamental stumbling block to using a 4-digit year was that punched card. All your data in 80 columns, you were a hero at the end of the 50s or in the 60s. You had to go to a second card, you're a bum. And people that way. You realize this doubles my expense. I need twice as many cards because you guys, you damn guys frequently, ran over onto a second card. In 1957, would you have gone to a second card, or would you have snipped what looked like a redundant 19 off the beginning? It's an interesting question. Well, hollerith cards weren't big enough. Programmers compromised. They just snipped out the 19. And in case you probably only know about Y2K from Time magazine in the last year or one of the other news media, I'd like to give some sort of a gold star or a bird picture to a fellow named Bob Beamer, who was at that time at IBM and was one of the language designers for the language system, the character system that we call ASCII, A-S-C-I-I, who in 1961 warned that we would regret not having 4-digit dates and kept on his nagging, is the way I would put it, internationally for over a decade to no avail whatsoever. It would just have been too expensive for the people who are now spending billions of dollars to rectify it. But the other thing is to know just how crazy everyone is where these are concerned. All countries, well, 154 of them in the world, have committees that establish standards. Standards for the fillings in one's teeth and what metals they can be made of, for the filaments in light bulbs, etc. And many of these are subsequently internationally agreed to through an organization known as ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, but the ISO comes from its French form, which I won't pronounce in public. In 1971, ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, approved 4-digit year dates, and 2 years later, in '73, the international organization adapted them. And commercial computing paid no attention whatsoever, because one has to recognize that there are two kinds of standards when we talk about standards. There are the general practices within any field, which we call the standard way of doing things. And then there are legislated standards, which may be totally different and which by and large no one pays attention to whatsoever because there is no real enforcement. Anyway, it's 25 years since everyone should have been using 4-digit year designations. Now, one of the other things I think that one ought to keep in mind is just how perfused our entire culture is with chips. I don't mean potato chips or corn chips, I mean computer chips. And you probably have never really thought about them at all. But if you have a clothes washer, there's a chip in there that determines what the time cycle should be. If you have VCRs or a cable box, you've got chips in there. If you have a coffee maker, a bread machine, in all likelihood an electric stove, all of these contain myriads. Your dishwasher, your clothes washer, your clothes dryer, and all of those little things. All of those could go awry. However, they're of no real seriousness when you think about it. And it's why I was talking about little glitches earlier on. If you put your mix into the bread machine, or grind your coffee and put it into your coffee machine, before you go out to your New Year's Eve party, because you know that when you get back from the New Year's Eve party, you either will not remember to do so because you'll be so tired, or you won't remember to do so because you'll be so drunk. But at any rate, you set this all up. If there is a glitch, the worst thing that will happen is that you will not have fresh bread or fresh coffee when you wake up on New Year's Day, whatever time it is. This is not a major catastrophe. It is not life-threatening. If your VCR has lost its ability for you to preset that, New Year's Day, the Rose Bowl parade for some obscure reason of your own, it, again, isn't life-threatening. It doesn't really matter. So that there might be all sorts of glitches on that level, probably none of which will affect any of us. I mean, seriously, severely. There may be a power outage here and there, but everyone here lives in Massachusetts. We've all gone through power outages, and I don't expect that it would be more than a few hours, though it is a cold time of year to have to go without heat if you're running on electrical heat. But you can always put another sweater on. Or that's because I still have no confidence in our grid system. I mean, I can remember the blackout in 1966 in Manhattan. Five, thank you. I could remember which apartment I was living in, and I couldn't remember what year it was. And I was told thereafter that they had really gone through and they'd fixed up the grid system and all the rest. And then sure enough, 4 years ago, I was in San Francisco when the West Coast had its failure of exactly the same sort. So that clearly the power companies haven't learned as much as they might have learned. So that I don't know whether I have total confidence where Boston Edison, et cetera, are concerned. But one thing I'm sure of, and that is that if there is a sporadic power outage, it will in fact be a sporadic outage. It will not be prolonged, et cetera, because by and large we have built things there where a human can overrule whatever it is that the computer has done. And I think those are the real nexus of what this is. Well, but now you must be thinking to yourselves, well, all of that's clear. I now understand where it came from. I understand why there's a problem. Why can't we just fix it by sticking 19 in front of all year designations? Well, it's not difficult to do that. It's just almost impossible. And I'll explain why. Any programmer in probably almost any language can look at a line of code that contains a date calculation or a date declaration and make the necessary changes to the program to make the Y2K problem disappear. But the problem is that that isn't the problem. If I say, just put 2 digits back in, you're making an assumption. People aren't even aware of that assumption because that's what makes it dangerous. We don't know exactly where the dates are. We have to find them before we can put those digits back in. And finding them is part of the problem. What you have to do is imagine how much computer code has been written since, well, let's say the end of 1957. The reason I picked the end of 1957 is because October 1957 is when Jim Backus invented Fortran, which was really the first computer programming language, and which was my first computer language when I studied it in May '58 on mimeographed sheets of paper. There were no books. Try and imagine how much programming has gone on in those 40 years, pardon me. It's not unusual for a company like American Express, for example, to have well over 100 million lines of computer code running its system. That's not including the fact that I have 2 Amex cards, one of which belongs, so to speak, to my younger daughter and periodically has surprise amounts on it. Thank you, Daddy. I'm sure there are many of you in this room who are in similar situations. But as an example of how much code there is in some of the things we use right now, Microsoft's Windows NT, the way it comes in that box you can see in a computer store, et cetera, is about 40 million lines of code. If you multiply that by all the different operating systems and all the different things like games, et cetera, and the business software, you realize the magnitude. Doing a sort of a rundown of silly arithmetic, what you can do is say, all right, well, a reasonable programmer can probably read 100 lines of code an hour. Why not? I mean, it would depend on what it is, but let's say 100 because I can divide that. And here I've got 40 million. So that means that in 400,000 hours, a single person could read through all of the Microsoft code. Well, you know, there are probably 200 working days in a year and 8-hour days. And so we get 30. That's easy enough to do because 8 times 2 is 16. So we have 1,600. Let's even grant a little bit more effort, and we'll give them 2,000 2,000 hours of work in a year, and now we're going to divide 2,000 into 400,000, and we find out, much to our surprise, that it's going to take us several decades to just read through that one piece of code. Oh, well, what we'll do is we'll throw a whole bunch of other guys at it. You see, we could have 40 guys doing it, and that cuts it down to only a year or so. Well, there are two problems there. One is the juncture between one person's piece and another person's piece, and the other one, to quote an old friend, Lou Katz on the West Coast, is that you cannot, in fact, have a baby by making 9 women pregnant for a month. Things just don't work out. It really doesn't work that way. The other problem that you'll encounter is a philosophical one, and that is, what is a date? This is obvious to all of us, but it's very, very difficult to describe exactly what it is so that, and now I'm using a word that I shouldn't use, so that a computer will understand what you're talking about. I mean, computers really don't understand anything. They manipulate symbols. But when a computer subtracts, let's say, 55 from 0, 0, and offers the result of minus 55, it does so following rules of arithmetic. It does so correctly. It's correct until we decide that those numbers represent years, a concept that's totally alien, of course, to a computer. And since the numbers don't contain all the necessary information, the answer is silly. It's silly because 00 should represent 2000, but we've instructed it to assume that 55 represents 1955, and therefore that 00 represents 1900. And these incorrect instructions, as a result, give us an error. Had we labeled all the dates according to some naming standard, all dates would be prefaced, let's say, by the word date. And that would be it. And there would be a very nice special set of rules that say, when instead of dollars or pounds, etc., which is when you manipulate money in various ways, you come to something that begins with the word date, this gets treated differently. We didn't do so. It would have been difficult, but it could be done. It's really going to be very expensive. Many people have spent a great deal of money. The New York Stock Exchange budgeted $10 million to do the conversion for its systems. They did it for two reasons. First of all, they felt they would lose more by not doing it. Second of all, they felt very strongly that if, with the markets the way they were 2 years ago, which is when they made the decision in winter 96, 97, that if there were some glitch in the NYSE that lasted for more than a few hours, the entire world financial setup would be influenced by it. The Japanese, for example, are way behind in business and banking coming to grips with the problems of Y2K. But if the Tokyo Stock Exchange suffers a meltdown for the first 3 days of the new year, the world will not, in fact, shiver or shudder or anything of that sort. If NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange do, it might well. And as a result, they and the U.S. Federal Reserve have done really splendid work in trying to make sure that this doesn't happen. When was the last time any of you bought something of substance and didn't use plastic? I bet it's quite a while. Right. Think of every single one of those point-of-sale things that the cashier swipes through going on the fritz, because all of those have chips. Think of those of you who live in buildings that you neither own nor are only 2 or 3 stories tall, i.e. a large apartment house, this sort of thing, with the elevator going off. Again, these are largely annoyances. But the worst thing that could happen is if anyone here really panics about the whole thing. What does panicking mean? Panicking means, as some people have suggested, take $1,000 out of your ATM before the 31st so that in case the ATMs don't work, you'll have the cash. This is exactly the, or buy a couple of gallons of bottled water and an extra loaf of bread and some cheese in case the power goes off at home, or this sort of thing. And the answer is that's all fine, except it makes the problem even more horrible. The Bureau of the Currency of our country has decided to put an extra $10 billion into circulation in case people rush on banks to get cash. However, that's trivial because the amount of deposits and the amount of cash in circulation is a very small amount regarding the actual amounts in deposit. You probably are all aware of that. If a bank actually runs out, because we've all run out to take $1,000 or $2,000 or $5,000 or whatever dollars from our accounts, it will cause a domino-like panic around the country, because we all know CNN will tell everyone instantaneously. And the same thing is true for the sorts of backup at your local grocery store. I mean, if I walk in and I buy, and each of you buys an extra 3 or 5 gallons of bottled water, just in case that happens, the supermarket is going to be out of bottled water. They will then have trouble getting a large order refilled. People coming in and seeing empty shelves will immediately make everything worse. And this is the thing that I fear most. That is to say, the human reaction to just what might go on. Of course, you know, there is one thing. I don't know, I doubt whether there's anyone here, but if there's anyone who is a true millenarist, that is to say that the world, in fact, will come to an end at the millennium, then you have nothing to worry about. I mean, it's a very, very strange but interesting set of problems. The fascinating thing is that there are all sorts of things linked with them, things that, again, no one dreamt of in, let's say, 57 to 71, somewhere like that. And let me itemize a couple of them for your amusement. I mean, it is amusement. You can look at your bank card and your credit card, your health card, your driver's license, your insurance card, your ID if you have them. How many contain 2-digit years? Almost all of mine do. How many systems are dealing with that data? A lot. Which one will assume that on my driver's license, the fact that it expires in 00 meant that it expired 100 years ago and will automatically issue me all sorts of delinquency things because the Division of Motor Vehicles has not come up to snuff? I don't know, and I don't know that the state hasn't come up to snuff, incidentally. But on January 1st of this year, Sprint, the telephone supplier, was out of commission for 3 hours. The odds are there were 3 hours when none of us even attempted to make a call that would have gone over Sprint because it was right at the year. Similarly, the passport control computers in Sweden were out of commission for just under 4 hours on January 1st. These were both caused by the 99. If you worked with Algol or COBOL in the 60s, 2 of the early computer languages, 99 was the signal to exit from a program. Why not? You have to have something that will do it. There has to be some way to do it. No one had invented the escape key yet, which was 1961, in case you care. You read so many interesting things if you do technological history. So that we know that we've had problems. Well, could we have other days with problems? Oh, yes, we could. Yes, we could. We could have April 9th, 1999, because it's the 99th day of the year. And who knows what some computers of whatever vintage might think at that point. Think always in quotation marks. Respond to it. July 1st, 99, because it's 45 of the states have July 1st, 99 as the first day of fiscal 2000. September 9th, 1999, where we have 4 nines, when 5 nines in COBOL meant dump everything. There's something dramatically wrong. I've written these down because otherwise I would forget one. The fact that 2/29/00 is a leap year, something which many programs don't indicate, because to make up the one extra day, all the centuries are the only years divisible by 4 that don't have leap years, except the ones that are divisible by 500. And there were no computers in 1500 for us to worry about. Or there were, but we called them abacuses. There are a lot of these. And the real answer, if anyone asks you, is that we don't know. It may be that at some point all of these trivialities will vanish. It may be that one major glitch will occur. The U.S. Department of Defense has gone through every one of them, of those silos in North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and up to the frost line in Canada, and have stated publicly that that despite the apocalyptic rumors, there are in fact no dangers. Unfortunately, and we just had one of an ambassador, a special ambassador, I guess is the phrase, envoy, go to Russia, is we don't have that guarantee for what was the USSR and its missile silos. But my guess is that the worries are just worries. And I'll explain why, and then I'll take questions. The why is really simple. If you personify the computers in those things, whether they're bombs or missiles or whatever, what's going to happen is that this timer will click over and it's going to say 00. And the computer in that launch vehicle is going to say to whatever its command computer is, I got a 00 and I can't find that in my signal table. And the supervisory computer is going to say, respond, if you want, to that. Something on the order of, I don't know what it means either, let's shut down. It's not going to say, I don't know what it means, let's launch everything in sight. There are small, horror things. I came up with one a couple of months ago and panicked. I was in Britain, I was at the British Library, and I literally panicked the directors because I said, well, what happens if there is a power outage? And they said, oh, they've got an emergency generator, etc. I said, well, number one, buy a couple more 50-gallon drums of kerosene for the generator. That's your first precautionary thing. I said, how quickly does it go on? And they said something like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, something like that. And I turned to the woman who's the director of physical plant for the British Library, and I said, when do your burglar and fire alarms go off? And she went, Everyone's seen or read the Poseidon Adventure. We all know that the way to break into something is that you cut the power to the burglar and fire alarms, and then nothing will go off, etc., etc. Okay, they've got 15 seconds. If a human being doesn't throw it, it automatically signals. I'm willing to bet that's true along, let's say, Downtown Crossing in Boston or downtown Manhattan. That is to say, if the power to those fire and burglar alarms is cut for as long as 45 seconds or a minute, we're going to have every police and fire station in the entire urban areas absolutely panicked. At the same time when there are God knows how many revelers out on the streets, and at the same time when they're setting off the fireworks right outside my window. But the thing is that that's a real horror story, and it's one where I could see some of it happening. What I advised the British Library was to turn off the burglar and the fire alarms completely at 11 p.m. on the 31st, and to put on a triple shift of actual human beings inside and outside the library until the next morning. Because that way you're absolutely secure on this. And I mean, even though I'm not English, the whole notion of Beowulf and the Magna Carta, etc., along with 12 million books and things, just being soaked by the fire department or something like that, it really doesn't touch me as something I really want to be the cause of. But I'll give you one more of the true silly stories. And I don't know enough about Salem, that is to say, in detail, to know whether it will happen here. Do the traffic signals downtown change on the weekends, at nights, etc.? That is to say, in Boston, they go to blinking reds and blinking yellows after about 1 o'clock in the morning, etc. Do they do that here? Okay. I'm willing to bet that there's no one in the town government, because I know there's no one in the city of Boston who has checked what the computer running those things does. And I have this wonderful vision of Massachusetts drivers, we are world famous, with no traffic signals whatsoever, coming home from the New Year's party. Obviously what you do is you stay home or you go to a friend's who is within walking distance. Are there any questions or any answers, in fact? Yes, sir. Yes. The question was whether, if one bought a new computer at this time, it would be protected. The odds are yes. And I should make it clear also, there are a couple of other points. All computers will not be affected by this. If you have a computer, for example, that is running the Unix operating system, the Linux operating system, Mac OS, the Macintosh operating system, none of those have, for next year, a dating system that ends in 00. The one in Unix and Linux is a little bit on the weird side. It's the, wait a second, it's the 60th birthday of one of the people who was an important developer. So it's in, which means that it's in 2000 and, yeah, thank you. Kirk McCusick's birthday. I mean, you know, it's a little bit on the strange side, but it's better than ending in a 00. I'm not at all sure what the Mac OS expiry date is, but it's not 2000. So that first of all, you're dealing with, by and large, things that run Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows NT. 95 is definitely not Y2K safe. 98 is about 72% Y2K safe, and the claim from Redmond, Washington is that it's only ancillary programs that haven't been made safe, but that the basic operating system and the normal functions like Microsoft Word and one of the spreadsheets and this sort of thing are just fine. And NT seems to be about the same percentage or a little bit better. It's still not 100%, but it's certainly over 80%. And they've all been conscious of this and they've worked at it. You can also, if you go out and buy something within the next week or 2 or 3 months or some such, most of the computer manufacturers and all of the software people have 800 numbers and websites where you can get all the fixes. They've all worked out fixes. It's just we live in a universe where what we call legacy systems are dreadfully important. Legacy systems are things that aren't necessarily au courant. I still have a Mac SE from 1987 sitting in my wife's sewing room. I have an old Dell, which isn't really that old, it's 7 years old, but it's antiquated at this point, sitting on one of my tables. But there are people with a lot of older hardware and software that they don't want to change. And they have got to work out ways to fix what they've got. The big corporations have transited in very interesting ways. Just as I mentioned Amex, I mentioned New York Stock Exchange, pardon me, Amex has done an absolutely super job. If I were an investor, I'd give them, another gold star or something like that, because they've done such a good and careful job. Morgan Stanley has done a brilliant job. Union Bank of Switzerland, which is a bunch of disagreeable people when I worked there, but that has nothing to do with how absolute Central European German thorough they were with the problem. And really very, very fine. And there are a number of others. Salem Brothers apparently has done a very good job. Yeah, please.
You mentioned human beings able to overrule glitches.
Mm-hmm.
Now we in our kitchens, can we overrule our stoves and our...
Certainly. When you got in, right, the question is, can we overrule things in our kitchens? And the answer is yes. Because the ones that have real timers in them, like your bread machine or coffee maker or your microwave or something of that sort, we all know that when we got them first, we plugged them in and they blinked at us in some strange, bizarre way. Either it had no digits at all, or it had zeros across the line, or it said 12:00, something of this sort. And we just said it. Well, you'll be able to do that on January 1st. There's still a reset button. There's still a way to set it up again. It won't know what happened. Because it doesn't know anything. But you've now told it. The thing is that what you've got to differentiate is stuff like that and stuff like, wherever Salem gets its power from, deciding to shut down. And then some engineer runs over and overrides that. And so it's that 6 or 8 or 10 or even 15 minutes. It's not a major sort of thing. Yes?
Are you saying that everything can be overridden? Once everything is overridden, it's just a question of resetting dates, because you're getting us all to be laughing here, and it seems like a lot of the issues that you're bringing up are not really laughing matters, and when they all turn into one huge pile, not just one toaster.
That's right.
And when you're talking about the defense system, I've also heard that the medical industry is very, very design. There's a lot of very serious things.
Well, there are two different... The question was whether I'm trivializing this, and I think I may have to some extent, but if I may, because the question there was the medical system. The medical system is an interesting problem. If you walk into, the Salem Hospital Group, the North Shore Medical Center now, you'll find that most of these bedside monitors are manufactured by HP, and a very large amount of the X-ray, et cetera, equipment is manufactured by Siemens. HP has done a wonderful job, but very few of the hospitals have gone back if they have equipment that's older than 4 to 5 years. However, 10 years ago, if I had suffered chest pain and a numbness down my left arm, they wouldn't have had a monitor to put me on anyway. They would have come in periodically and checked my pulse and heartbeat. And all the interns are still capable of doing that. So I think that even in the intensive care units, if 1 or 2 of the older monitors just go blank on them, they either will have a substitute or they will actually go to reliable human beings. The real problem I mean, to me, on a medical thing, are these automatic implants that many of us have, either the ones that dispense drugs or heart monitors and pacemakers, because the estimates in general for about 7 to 10 years for the life of a pacemaker, and by and large, I would guess that at the older edge of that, they probably don't know what will happen at all. And at the last few years of it, they do. The other thing, of course, has to do with power to all of this incredible apparatus. And there, I don't know a big city or an eastern seaboard hospital that doesn't have a reliable, independent power source. That is to say, special generators that go on when the power drops. So that I think that if I were wearing a pacemaker that was over 5 years old, I would check with my cardiologist. But outside of that, I don't think I would panic. It is serious because we have come to depend. One of the reasons that I was talking about things like coffee makers and bread machines and the rest is that you mustn't think that this is purely something big businesses will worry about, and not all of us. Every one of us who has a little alarm clock sort of calendar that one carries in one's pocket, or something of that sort, has to think about what happens if I change the date, or if I look ahead in my calendar at let us say, February 28th, 2000, which is a good date to look at, and then I say, what's tomorrow, or whatever the appropriate request is on this little machine, next day, or something like that. If it doesn't have the 29th, you know that you may as well go out and buy a new one. And the same thing is true for all sorts of major things. And I think there are concerns where some of the major things are concerned. But luckily, New Year's night, or whatever I should call it, the period from New Year's Eve to, let's say, 3 in the morning, is not one of the airline's heaviest flight schedule times. In fact, both United and American don't run the red eye from the West Coast to the East Coast on the 31st in normal years because they just don't have any traffic. So that, and also you've got to remember, all of our flight controllers were trained originally to not depend on the computer signals and the radar, but to depend on actual reception through their earphones and the rest. So that Chicago, O'Hare, or Kennedy, or Logan may slow down to one flight entering or leaving every, let us say, 2 minutes from the roughly every 30 seconds that goes on during a business day. But I don't think that there will be dangers where that's concerned. It's very difficult. Don't forget, people talking about disasters in banking or business and the rest are talking about what absolutely might happen. And there are a lot of people, I mean, my friend Peter DeYega in Canada has made a fortune out of going around breeding, fomenting, that's better, absolute misery and torment about the disasters that will ensue. I don't think we will undergo them. I think we will undergo problems. I think some of them may well be serious. It really depends a great deal. The British have already said that they're sure that there will be sporadic power outages in the northwest grid. That's the area north and west from Manchester, Liverpool, etc. And that there may be some in the new year in the southeast grid, which is Canterbury and the rest of the district, Kent in general, southeast of London. But again, I can remember when we didn't have as reliable electrical power as we do right now, and even went through a period of rationing of electrical power, though not locally, several decades ago. But there was someone, yes, thank you.
You mentioned earlier the 154 countries in the world.
Yeah.
You mentioned the power grid. And I'm sure you're aware that Dr. Ed Yardeni at Deutsche Bank Securities
Sure.
has forecast a greater than 50% chance of worldwide recession based on possible problems. I'm wondering what you think, given the fact that there's a number of countries teetering on social and economic disaster. And I wonder what you think about their power grids and how they stand in the whole world supply of goods and services.
Well, okay, the question had to do with the fact that Yardeni at Deutsche Bank has said that he, well actually, yeah, 70% of a chance of a worldwide recession lasting anything from 3 weeks up to years. And what will happen in the third world, where a lot of things are very fragile, both political and economic. The countries that have been totally removed from any sort of Y2K planning are all, so far as I can tell, are all of Sub-Saharan Africa, with the exception of the Republic of South Africa, all of South and Southeast Asia, with the sole exceptions of Singapore and Hong Kong. Mainland China has done decently, I would say, not wonderfully, but decently. And Japan has done some stuff, but not a great deal. Canada and the US, Great Britain, and most of the EU have done quite well. I think that if one takes that 0 to quite well scale, it will match almost 1 for 1 to the numbers of telephones, electrical power stations, etc., across the world. So that, for example, the power grid going down in Mali, Chad, and Togo probably wouldn't have anywhere near the sort of impact that it would if it happened in more developed countries. But it will certainly cause problems where conveying food to places or conveying products away from those places will be concerned. The one that worries me, if I had to have worries about places that I've never been and may never go, is the entire Indian subcontinent, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Bhutan, etc. In all of those places, the infrastructure, the electronic infrastructure, is really both relatively fragile. Most trains are still wood and coal powered on the subcontinent. And I don't really know. I think that in the enormous cities, Bombay, Calcutta, Delhi, this may be an absolute disaster because they cannot survive by themselves. They effectively survive on a day-to-day basis. So that while it's certainly warm enough, etc., so you don't worry about, on the one hand, air conditioning, or on the other hand, heating, the supply system is maybe a true disaster where that's concerned. And especially in a place like Bombay, where there are such sharp divisions between the Hindu activists and the Muslim and other religious groups, there may be a true disaster, both economic and social, a spasm, if you want. I think Ed Yardeni did a fine job, even though I noticed that the LA Times misread what he said and has said that they published that it was a 40% chance. What it is that he grades the kinds of chances. He said there's a 5% chance, for example, that there's a glitch and it's a matter of a couple of days. And there's a 40% chance that it's a major interval. And then he goes on to, 45 from 70. 25% chance in his mind that there would be a major ripple in the world's economy that would last a year or more. I want, you know, despite the fact that we all talk as though, I mean, we drive all sorts of vehicles from all over the world, etc., but we have become increasingly more dependent since the OPEC crisis in the 70s on foreign goods and services. Our balance of payments last year was the largest ever. That's not just because of inflation. So that if there is downfall, we are indeed all interlinked. I mean, it's very nice to be a one-worlder and say that we're all brothers and sisters, but it's not just that. It's that our economy influences theirs and theirs has impact on ours. And I happen to be an admirer of what Ed's done in the past, so I'm probably still in there with the 5 to 40% who think that there will be something, but it won't be a major disaster. But there are other people like De Ritter who go around telling people that there will be a disaster, or that I don't think you should go out to the woods and get a cabin and stock it up with wood and kerosene and the rest of this. But I do think that we shouldn't panic. And I think panic is I mean, we can all remember that, well, you probably can't, that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And the thing is that I think the same is true where technological problems are concerned. But, yeah, Madam.
Would you like to make a few more comments concerning communication between the Defense Department and Russia, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, the question had to do with communications between the Defense Department and Russia. Well, I have no insider types of information. I have only the information that I glean from what we release in press releases, that say our government, and what I can, both Reuters in England and Agence France Presse in France, because what I do is I read the headlines there every morning, first thing, because it gives me a different point of view from CNN, etc. It looks as though there's serious worry where both what kind of computer programs and specific locations of some of the missiles are concerned. On the other hand, no one seems to have dredged out yet the original documents that would give anyone either the confidence of knowing, okay, the fail-safe procedure on these was that if you don't know what's happening, shut down, which is what ours will do, or whether it's launch. If it is launch, don't make any appointments for the 2nd of January. But, and I'm sorry, because you're right, I shouldn't make light of that sort of thing, but I have no other way of handling it, because I have no way of getting into Bielorussia and saying, all right, now tell me exactly where these silos are, and I'm going with this group of 3 guys and we're going to check up on the computing, because the first thing they would do is shoot me, and then they'd say how sorry they were to my widow. The thing is that we really don't know, and it's an unfortunate thing, but it's the result of having a Cold War that ran from the period of Dean Acheson straight through till 1989. And it wasn't anyone's fault. I mean, it wasn't our fault, so to speak. But the real answer is that they're still very secretive. And if it wasn't for the fact that I know some Russian computer people who were in what was called the Moscow Academy of Sciences, and God knows what it's called now, and know that they're really first-rate and of high quality, my guess is that when those things were designed, they were designed absolutely as well as ours were. Thank you.